British companies are still selling weapons to Israel because Keir Starmer's government has not implemented a complete arms embargo. How is this allowed to happen, and can it be stopped? Today I'm outside the High Court in London once again, joined by Dearbhla Minogue, one of the lawyers who's trying to stop this, and also Ahmed from Al-Haq, which is the group that Dearbhla is representing in this case, a Palestinian human rights group. What can we expect to happen today?
So the reason we're still bringing this case to court is because even though the government has actually suspended its arms sales directly to Israel, it's maintained a flow of weapons into a global supply chain through which F-35 parts are assembled by a range of nation states which take part in a global supply chain. And even though the government has assessed that there's a clear risk of Israel using British weapons to commit serious violations of international humanitarian law, they've still contributed parts to this global supply chain because they don't want to interfere with global peace and security in their terms.
Ahmed, can you tell us a bit about the sort of human rights violations that Al-Haq has seen happening in Gaza recently, and the examples that you're bringing to the attention of the court today? I see in the pre-action letter there's a lot of UN bodies that have been cited. Could you just tell us a bit about some of those instances that you're trying to highlight today?
Absolutely. And this is, in our view, a full-fledged live-streamed genocide. The situation in Gaza is horrific, especially in the north. Israel is engaged in an extermination campaign targeting civilians deliberately, targeting hospitals. Basically, almost all hospitals in Gaza have been destroyed. Targeting schools where people are sheltering, targeting food storages, targeting food distribution points whenever the fraction of aid enters the Gaza Strip, especially in the north. We're facing starvation that is being used as a method of warfare, the crimes against humanity of persecution, extermination. But above all, we believe this is a genocide over a year now. It's really disappointing to see the British government not only being complicit in this genocide, but even engaged in a campaign of distortion of international humanitarian law in the service of a racist apartheid regime. I think we're at a moment of history where the UK needs to think and make its own foreign policy and break out from US hegemony and stand principally for international law and stop employing double standards and selectivity.
Thanks, Ahmed. So just on that point of genocide, in the letter that you sent to the court, Dearbhla, you highlighted a recent exchange that David Lammy had in the Houses of Parliament.
Comments from the benches opposite that suggest that Israel is somehow conducting a war of annihilation, extermination and of genocide. There is obviously much suffering in Gaza, and we all accept that, but this terminology is completely inappropriate, not accurate, and is repeated by the protesters and the lawbreakers who are intimidating British Jews, as we saw again this weekend. So will the Foreign Secretary take this opportunity to say that there is not a genocide occurring in the Middle East?
Foreign Secretary.
Those terms were largely used when millions of people lost their lives in crises like Rwanda, the Second World War and the Holocaust. And the way that they are used now undermines the seriousness of that term.
So they had David Lammy saying that it's not a genocide in Gaza because millions of people haven't been killed. What's your comeback on that in terms of the legal case here today and its implications?
I mean, I think this is quite embarrassing for the UK government that the Foreign Secretary, who's responsible for essentially taking these decisions, has made such a blunder in talking about the definition of genocide, because it's absolutely absurd, the idea that millions of people need to be killed before the crime of genocide can be made out. Actually, it's possible for the crime to be made out without a single person being killed, because a lot of the prohibited acts contained in the definition include things like separating children from their parents, for example. However, even if we are looking at the numbers of the dead, it's absolutely outrageous and so insulting to the memory of the dead people to essentially argue that not enough people have been killed. I mean, more than 40,000 people have been killed in Gaza. far more than established genocides where far fewer people have been killed than in the case of Gaza, and far less blatantly than we're seeing on our TV screens every single day. So I think it's rudimentary and highly embarrassing for David Lammy.
The main arms export that the government continues to allow to Israel are supplies for the F-35 fighter jet. This is described as the most lethal fighter jet. Over 15% of the aircraft is made in the UK. This includes the rear fuselage. It even includes a bomb release mechanism. Now, these aircraft have been dropping 2,000-pound bombs over Gaza. Can you tell us about the impact when a bomb like that lands in such a densely populated area as Gaza?
No, absolutely. It's horrific. We're talking about one of the most densely populated areas in the world. Even before this genocide, back in 2012, the UN concluded in a report that Gaza will be unlivable by 2020 because Israel has been putting the Palestinians in Gaza on a strict diet for decades before that. So to throw these kind of bombs in densely populated areas and even on refugee camps and places where even Israel designated as safe areas, and then throw it on tents, shredding children bodies into pieces is just a monstrous act. To say that this is somewhat acceptable by the UK or the UK does not bear responsibility is ridiculous, because the UK government itself recognized that F-35 fighter jets are being most likely being used. This was the UK's conclusion, that these fighter jets are being used in international humanitarian law violations. So to continue supporting these bots is, in my view, an active participation in these crimes. We're beyond complicity, and it's quite ridiculous from Lammy or others to say to have such distorted interpretation of genocide, because the UK's government has different versions of how it interpreted genocide. For example, in situations like Myanmar or Uyghur and China, they had a very, I would say, even liberal way of interpreting genocide. So what you see here is not an interpretation of the law, is actually complicity at its ugliest shape, double standards, hypocrisy, and in my view, co-perpetration of these crimes. So whether Lammy, Starmer, the whole members of the UK government, in my view, and previous government as well, they're complicit in these crimes. They have blood of Palestinian children on their hands, and we, the Palestinians, will never forgive them or forget their heinous crimes. And there's no amount of propaganda or distortion of international humanitarian law that will hide this truth. People see them for who they are. They're monstrous war criminals, and we will not rest until they're all held accountable before their own courts and even before other courts if possible.
Thank you, Ahmed. And I know you both need to go into court very shortly, so we're filming this before the hearing today, and I'll try and do an update afterwards. But can you tell us sort of what are you asking for today, and if you don't get that, you know, what else could happen?
The claim is kind of split into two parts now. We're continuing with our arguments around how the government previously refused to accept that there was a clear risk that Israel was committing serious violations of IHL. Even though they have conceded that now, we're arguing that the court should still assess whether their previous refusals to accept that were lawful. And we're also arguing that this carve-out for the F-35 parts is unlawful. We're arguing that on several bases. One is that we say it actually conflicts with the criminal law, because there are essentially people now in the UK transferring parts which they know are going to end up in Israeli jets, despite a government assessment that there's a clear risk of serious violations of IHL taking place. Serious violations of IHL are war crimes, which are crimes under domestic law. So legally it's no different to somebody assessing there's a clear risk of somebody committing a murder with a shotgun. You nevertheless sell them that weapon. So we say there's actually a serious issue when it comes to criminal law here. We also say that there's a direct conflict between this decision and the UK's obligations under the Genocide Convention and the Geneva Conventions. So these arguments are all fundamentally very, very important. So we're asking the judge to essentially decide which ones can go forward to full hearing, when that full hearing should be, and some other procedural matters.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sure everyone will be watching developments very closely. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
The hearing actually went on almost all day, and by the time it had finished, it was dark and raining outside, so I wasn't able to film an update. But I did write an article that you can read on our website explaining what happened in the court and revealing government documents that show the reason Labour didn't impose a total arms embargo on Israel was because they were worried about America's reaction if they did that. I'd also like to thank everyone who's been watching and sharing these videos over the last year. It means that very soon we're going to have a new member of the team who's going to be able to work with me making these videos, and I won't have to film myself doing the interviews anymore. So some of the camera angles should be more conventional and more watchable. Thanks again for your support. And if you're new to this channel and you haven't subscribed already, please click the button below. Thanks for watching.